It is a pleasure to be together with all of you this evening. This is the third and last session of the series that was set up to supplement Father Edward's Sunday series, studying Professor John Inazu's book, Learning to Disagree. That series in turn was designed to help us think about the deep divisions that are we see all around us in the country. And we are taking up just a piece of that problem or that issue, working with a book by David Brooks called How to Know a Person. In our first session, we suggested that that each of us, those who see the world much as you and I do, or you do and I do, and those who see it differently than one of us or either of us, each such person is a child of God, uniquely equipped to help us see the world. Not everything others say should change our own behavior or our own view, but the love of God calls us to treat those with whom we disagree with respect and with care. Last week and tonight, we're trying to look at some practical, if sometimes difficult, ways to engage in actions, substantive conversations with people we care about, but with whom we disagree concerning important matters. Rather than keep the issues just at a totally theoretical situation, I put together a hypothetical. We began last week, a problem much like those we use in law school, where we try to create a fact situation and use that as the point of departure from which to derive some ideas that may be useful to us in other situations. We have John, your 18-year-old grandson, calling you on the phone from college. You don't hear from John often. You're very pleased to hear from him. Grandma says, I'm going with a group to occupy the university's administration building to get our school to divest its investments in Israel because of the Zionist occupation of Palestine. Can I count on you to bail me out when I'm arrested?
That's easy.
How will you respond? Oh, I hear people saying that's easy. Now, what makes it easy? The first response, what would your response be, David?
I guess my response would be, have you considered what the Palestinians have done to Israel?
Well, that's one possible reaction. Does everybody agree, particularly those of you who've been at the earlier sessions, what the first, what your reaction might be instead?
Be careful.
I'm not meaning to dismiss that.
Be careful.
Be careful is one.
I would want to listen to him, show him respect. I might not agree with him. I've been through this routine before, by the way. It's not a new one to me.
I understand you're involved with mediation and trying to reach solutions, and that's
So the first thing I would do is listen
yeah.
and find out what his position is and get him to talk.
Well,
How do you
interestingly,
like-
that's where we started last week. What we suggested is John is your grandson. This is somebody you haven't heard from in a while. You're getting a call that is probably unexpected. At least the content of it is unexpected. And yet this is a child who you've known since his birth, a child who you hope to know for many years into the future, someone with whom you have a history, you hope to have a future. And the first reaction that we ought to have, and we're talking now about Not the guy who sits next to you on the airplane who just has some goofy idea, wants to try to sell it to you. But somebody with whom you have a relationship, a family member. It may be a close friend, somebody you've known since high school. I have several of those friends, and you don't want to lose those kind of friends. For two reasons. One, you care about them. And second, they may indeed have something to teach you about the situation. You won't react immediately. You try to find a good place to get together. It may be a private way to Zoom or FaceTime these days. If John is away hundreds of miles and it's not convenient to go see him. But some setting in which you can treat John as the most important person in your life for the time that you're addressing this issue with it, and that you can give him your full attention. You'll try to be what David Brooks called an illuminator rather than a diminisher. I don't mean to pick on David, because my reaction, and I think about everybody in the group, the first reaction would tend to be, "You're nuts." Where did you get this idea? This is craziness. And yet, so it's a counterintuitive idea to say that you take a deep breath and you listen. But it's an important part of at least the insights that we're trying to develop in here as to how to address a difficult situation. You'll try to create a situation, and people laughed when we talked about him last week, but I think it's right. Brooks says the best illustrator of this is Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers from Pittsburgh, was a Protestant minister. He saw it as his Christian mission to help young children form a sense of themselves as people of worth, people who should take themselves seriously in the sense of be responsible for their own actions, and people that were genuinely special to meet. I say that this is one of those things where I say, do as I say, not as I do. I haven't. It's difficult for me, and I don't know. It may be difficult for you to be just genuinely open, genuinely to when somebody comes up to you, to devote your full and complete attention to them and not make judgments about them and so on. But that is a skill that we're suggesting in these sessions is worth developing. This is a situation or a skill that Father Edward and John Nazu spoke of as empathy. That is a good word for it. It's a very appropriate word for it, and we'll try to develop later what some of that may include. We'll try to see what John is not saying. Where did he get to this point? How did he get to this point? Who are John's friends? Who else inspires or motivates him? This is a kid who wants to go to jail, almost views it as an honor to go to jail. Somebody has got his number, and he has come to you to hopefully to have that affirmed, but you have almost the unique opportunity to try to make a constructive contribution to the situation. While you're doing this, you're sizing up the problem ahead. That is the problem of how to talk to John and what to say to him. But take time in this situation. what we've said. You're making an investment for the next phase of the discussion. I'd suggest to you that there may be three other preliminary issues. And when I say I suggest to you, I said in the first session, I'm relying on the insights from the Brooks book and others who've written in this area. But three other ideas that are at least worth mentioning. The first component in this kind of disagreement may be, let's see. Okay, that's the first component in the disagreement may arise from different relative senses of how important the substantive issue that he's talking about is. I think the best illustration of that, at least in my experience, you may have a different illustration, is climate change. For I think all of us are concerned about it, and about what kind of world we're leaving to our grandchildren. But our grandchildren are in some cases just scared out of their wits about it. For us, it is a question of the legacy we leave. For them, it's a question of whether they're going to live in a world that is just plain terrifying. And indeed, they may be participating in their own extinction. People have said worse about climate change. The point is that in having a conversation about this with John, or who your version of John, who you might have these kinds of conversations with, it's important to get a sense of how important the person thinks the issue is and why they think it's important. Because you may not give it the attention it deserves if you don't have the ability to sort of put yourself in the position that this person you care about is in. Second, a big part of the emotional content of a discussion can be about someone's sense that they're powerless generally, that people don't take them seriously. This is, there's a moving part of the Brooks book that talks about, when he was in a discussion about race relations with someone who was having was not believing he was taking them seriously. And I think that's a fair summary of what his position was. And he came to realize that the person in this situation had been so beaten down in prior conversations, other settings, that they didn't know, they didn't take him seriously, frankly, or take seriously his willingness to really engage with him. And that again is something that you need to have around. Third, I suggest that there are a number of situations today in which people use emotional issues or sensitive issues to try to, what I call, fight dirty. They basically try to throw unfair charges against you. And they tend to be unwilling to address their own role in a situation and figure out what is a real contribution to solving the problem. This is the paragraph that I found challenging and I think worth thinking about. For people who feel disrespected and unseen, politics is a seductive form of social therapy. Politics seems to offer an arena of moral action. To be moral in the world, you don't have to feed the hungry or sit with the widow. You just have to feel properly enraged at the people or policies you find contemptible. In the early, in the previous parts of our discussion, the first two sessions, we have struggled with the question of people who don't feel visible, people who don't feel loved or appreciated, and the question of how they do strike out. You may disagree, but Brooks suggests that when people feel unseen, they tend to shut down socially and become suspicious. They become afraid of what they need most, which is meaningful contact with other people. They become ashamed of their loneliness and lack a sense of self-worth. They create self-delusional worlds in which they make other people care about them. It is not an accident, Brooks suggests, that mass shooters, potential assassins tend to want to be famous, or not tend to be, but frequently are people who are seen as loners. They're described by their friends as people who just never came out and had a conversation. And Brooks says this is part of the problem we're dealing with, David.
To your point, and also, there's another dimension to this issue, this specific issue. One is that if you really without taking a side on this whole issue, if you really feel strongly about that, then you should be willing to go to jail for your belief. And you shouldn't have to call on me to bail you out of a situation which you yourself sort of got yourself into, I guess.
Well, that's a legitimate point, and a point you may want to make with John.
Yeah.
As you what you're saying, I think, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, that is that you may be trying, John may be trying to spread the burden of his own political position.
Well,
or moral position.
what I'm saying is, you know what, take responsibility for your action. I'm not gonna say you're right or wrong, but you take an action, take responsibility for it. And part of that is suffering the consequences of what you do. And you don't have to bring other people in to solve this problem for you.
Fair enough. And that's a helpful dimension to try to get into the conversation. The question is, would you lead with that?
No, I probably wouldn't. I would,
Well,
I'm not sure exactly how
Yeah, we're all softies with our grandkids.
Well, no, I think the whole thing of postponing and, of, hey, let's get together sometime and discuss this. When you can have a little more meaningful conversation then. Where's the first thing out of your mouth, so to speak?
I think.
But the occupation is tomorrow.
What are the ramifications of your action? What do you think ramifications might be in the future for your action? You have to think beyond tomorrow.
Okay,
Tomorrow,
Law of unintended consequences.
law of unintended consequences, exactly. You go tomorrow and you have a sit-in or whatever you're doing. You do that, you get arrested. Now you have consequences. But you have to think what's gonna happen, it's rolling it down the road, what is
All
the
the
next
other
thing?
reactions, how are those 5 other people, or 10 other people, 100 other people gonna respond? and all of a sudden you're in a
Are you gonna,
quagmire.
or is this child gonna be left standing alone in jail?
Right.
I mean, all these friends have suddenly
Disappeared.
Failed.
failed, yeah.
Okay, yeah, first question, one of the first questions you're gonna ask is how far have you thought through what the consequences
The
are?
consequences, yeah.
And talk with John about the consequences of what he has described to you.
I mean, let's decide he maybe wants to go to law school.
Yes,
Oh,
But
yeah.
but he's
Well, he has
already
just
assumed what the
nipped one in the
consequence is
bud.
gonna be.
yeah, you see, this, David's got the answer that I was gonna put in John's mouth. I've thought of that, Grandma, I'm here, I'm willing to take the consequences. Think of the folks who sat at the lunch counters in Birmingham.
Mhm.
Those are people that we honor. There are statues of them all over town. I could be such a person for this international situation. I want to be a part of that movement. I'm not here to try to argue with Judy Hudson. I know better than to do that. But I'm posing an answer because I think we have to consider the consequences of what we say to John. And both in terms of our relationship with John and John's view of himself. You gotta have an answer to that one at least, that proposition, or it's gonna, this is gonna deteriorate fast. Yeah,
To me, the key issue, the fundamental core of any kind of influence like this is that you have to have trust. And if you haven't been versed in the ways of building trust, and he's only asking you to do him a favor to get him out of a situation, but he doesn't trust you, then you have no influence over him whatsoever. So understanding the frameworks of building trust, and that also requires you understand the other side of the equation, which is what I use the acronym FUD: fear, uncertainty, doubt, distrust, and divisiveness. And that FUD is what's going to be turning inside of him. What are his fears? What are his uncertainties? Because if you can't overcome his FUD factors, you're not going to influence him either. Because he's got to say, I have confidence in what I am doing and confidence in you. And those are fundamental issues in a situation like this.
very good. That's very helpful. And the idea that we had been stressing up to now is that that's where you start. You have to start there with the sense, at least in mind, whether you use the acronym or some other form, the sense that you need to understand the person you're trying to influence. And that includes what it is he's afraid of and what it is that he's proud of. And that's why you have this preliminary discussion, lest you make some early mistakes that will render the rest of the conversation unsatisfactory, both in terms of the situation, but also in terms of the relationship. Anybody else? What, yeah,
Well, I think because you started out by saying that you don't talk to him very often. More than likely, you have no idea what's going on in this kid's head.
well, you didn't when he called.
That's right. And you may not anyway. I mean, he's in college, he's your grandson, and you care about him, and things are going along just fine. So I think you've got to start really at the very beginning, even just, I'm so glad you called, but it sounds like we need to talk about it. And not make any assumptions to start with, but start
Where
from
are you and
You
what
Say
where
I'm an
he
old
is.
fuddy-duddy.
where he is.
There's also that there's so many scams out there. That you can be glad that he has called
Maybe it's not him.
because.
Yeah, right.
Because
You really are my grandson.
you really are my grandson.
No, you
And
can't be.
I mean, there's so many scams of people wanting money, that, I'm glad to know what you're thinking and I am happy to be told what you're considering.
Okay, yeah, you're suggesting, and this is even more basic than I was starting with. And that's, make sure you know who you're talking to.
Exactly, I mean, no, but
And we've all had that kind of thing happen, where somebody
Every day.
calls and, I had a friend, who
I'm in jail, Dan,
allegedly
yeah.
sent an email saying he was locked up in, some foreign jail,
Right.
and all he needed was, my
But he didn't even send
credit
it
card
through
number.
first.
You know, good thing. And obviously it was a scam, but the people wouldn't have been trying to perpetrate it if they hadn't had some experience suggesting that there are people who respond to it. So that is it's a basic idea. This is a very quiet side over here. Yeah, Judy?
One word that I haven't heard that I think we've been talking about is the relationship. He's my grandson. I haven't heard from him in a long time. So if I had any term of endearment that I used to say, I would first want to be nursing our connection before I went anywhere else.
Yeah, that's that's a very good insight.
That's a
And
mother.
and there are things like that,
That's a-
pumpkin or or whatever the name is that you two shared. There are all sorts of things that might qualify, but we keep coming back to the point that is so fundamental, and that is the relationship. Are there other things though that you'd want to get into? Do you want to get into the Palestinian situation?
Let me address this in a way. I've actually had direct experience with a situation like
I
this.
know you have. Yeah.
And I actually put an end to one of these university takeovers.
Yeah.
This summer of '69,
Oh.
spring of '69.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and what we
The
found
good old
was,
days.
what we found was the instigators of it, which were called Students for a Democratic Society, were actually being run by the Russian government. And the students were being manipulated with propaganda and all kinds of incentives and one-sided situations. And once we exposed what actually was happening, people could make rational decisions about what should be done and peaceful decisions. And we said, we need to build unity. All of this was going to create spinning out of control of a set of situations, which in fact, had the university been taken over, though this is at Brown University, the whole Brown new curriculum would have been destroyed. And the university's whole future changed because we were able to create a unification and stop this kind of a demonstration, but not stop the energy of discussion and dialogue. So we moved the conversations to a higher level.
Yeah, it is important, and it's that kind of intervention is critical in a lot of these situations. My own prejudice in this is that a great deal of what we're seeing in the current world are people who want to get on television. And they want to get on
Celebrity.
television at another person's expense. So they recruit people like John to take the fall.
Carry the sign.
Well, yeah, carry the sign and take the fall, or take the penalty, take the jail term for their own ability to then go on, you pick the network, and say, and make their pitch as to why they're doing it. And John, that seems to me a dimension of this that you do want to take up with John, not necessarily lead with that, but it is a key part of your looking at this. One of the issues or one of the approaches that the authors of a book called The Crucial Conversations that I mentioned in the first session. It's one that Brooks relies on a lot. One of the things they say is try to steer the conversation in a direction of telling stories. That is, imagine what will happen. Picture with me, John, what you think you're going to do and why you think you're going to do it and what you think the consequences of it are, rather than talk in theoretical terms about the battled Israelis or whatever John thinks at some abstract level. Try to make it concrete. Imagine the life of a Palestinian citizen today, for example. Much of the argumentation on the campuses goes in terms of the poor people who are living in blocks that the Hamas has artillery depots underneath. This is a horrific situation for them to be in. And if you can get John to articulate what it is that's bothering him, you and he may be able to get on the same page on some issues. I'm not trying to make the argument or have you buy a particular argument here, but simply to recognize that if you can get the issue more concrete, more in the terms of the problem that we've tried to use to talk about these questions, you may be able to find agreements and find bases for pulling together instead of pulling separately. And once you can turn the proposition, as you've suggested, in a way that people recognize their common interest, you may be able both to get a better conversation, but also a better sense of what the right way of dealing with it is. Imagine the life of an Israeli citizen today, who was in northern Israel, for example, and just getting rained on by Hezbollah troops at the Golan Heights. That was a bad situation too. And as you talk through those issues, you're not talking so much in abstract terms as in concrete terms. What the authors of Crucial Conversations say is avoid stories that make one side totally a victim, the other totally a villain, and stories that produce no real resolution. Turn victims into people with choices and turn villains into real people with challenges, and then try to talk together intelligently about how you might try to move history, move the situation in a direction that is in fact going to make some sense. The final question is, how do you want this discussion with John to end? What do you hope happens at the end of the Zoom call or the series of Zoom calls, at the end of your visit to his campus, and you're spending more time probably with him than you've spent the last 3 or 4 years? What do you want each of you to be able to say? Hopefully both of you to be able to say. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question, but this problem started a long time ago and is being raised to make his own decisions, not be a follower of other people. Think about the situations and stuff like that. So, and I agree with some people have said that, it's the relationship and going back, and somewhere there was a disconnect in this relationship. They haven't talked with each other, but more importantly, I think, is you're the grandfather, you say, how could my grandson ever fall into this situation without thinking about the consequences? So I think at the end of the day, you want your grandson, in the situation or whatever, to know that he's got to be, he's responsible for his actions, not anybody else. He can only control what he does.
Exactly. He can only control what he does and the relationship, but the relationship is going to continue to be one in which you love him
Mhm.
and want the best for him.
Right.
And but in my view, you'll know you've won when he reaches his own conclusion that the simple answer, join the group down at the president's office Saturday night at 11:30 is that's way too simplistic.
Yeah.
He has not thought through either the history of how campuses work and what the consequences are of particular activity. He's probably not thought through what the consequences are in the Middle East. Is a single Palestinian going to be better off because he spends the next week and a half in jail developing a record? It is one thing to talk about the civil rights movement in the abstract, and I think many of us like to wish that we had a better record back in the 60s on in our handling of, we should have been at more demonstrations and should have been doing more things to make positive things happen in that period. But the idea that any one person is going to make that difference, or that John is going to make that difference in this setting, at this time, in this political environment, and so forth, is slim to none, at least in my view. I'm not trying to sell that. I'm just saying that as we think about the issues with John, your victory is for John to have the victory, for John to see himself as a responsible adult, not as a college kid who joins whatever group he happened to enjoy drinking with on Friday night. So Saturday night, he's going to do something else. Yeah.
I think this issue of responsibility is important, and I'd like to take it in a direction where you think maybe he's 19, 20 years old in this scenario. And has he actually thought through what his role is in life? Where is he going in life? What roles could he play in this game? This is a game. And in a game, you could play many different roles. You could be the role where you're sitting out there and you demonstrate and you get thrown in jail. You could play the role where you spit at the cops. By the way, somebody will probably instigate him to do that.
Sure.
Because that's what the game is, how the game gets played. Or you can play the role as a mediator, a problem solver. You know, should you learn both sides of this equation and be a peacemaker in this and give him the opportunity to think through what role could he play best at and what is he really good at?
Yeah,
You know, because he may not be good at this kind of a game.
well, and very few people are really good at it. That's one of the tragedies, I think, for people, Judy.
The other thing is demonstrations don't really solve that problem. Wait,
Which
that's
problem?
another. Well, you had
The
this,
Palestinian
you
problem.
had the Palestinian.
Yeah,
Or any
right,
problem.
Well, and the divestiture thing.
Yeah,
A demonstration doesn't do it. It's gonna be discussion, it's gonna be figuring out, you know, working with the university on, and what is their solution to the problem. It's not gonna be, walking around with signs or sitting in and refusing to get up and go anywhere. It's not going to be that. It's going to be ultimately working out a solution. And just because you're asking them to divest, just because you, John, are asking them to divest, they're not gonna divest. I mean, that's not, but there may be a solution where it may move towards something. But it has to come out of a discussion
Exactly, both of these
It-
points are
from,
really
from,
helpful.
from the university side. Just yelling at them is not gonna make the university talk to you.
I've got to take John's side on his.
Yeah, go ahead.
Demonstrations have caused a lot of things to happen. And
Yeah,
I think
but-
one of the things John is probably thinking of, maybe I can affect a good change or whatever. But there have been demonstrations that have led to great outcomes.
Yes,
Maybe
that's,
in some
there have.
firefighting college presidents. and
well,
stuff.
there's no question of, that's a very important qualifier, that it is the reason demonstrations continue is that at least there are enough instances where it appears that they cause change that
A positive change. So
yeah, positive change, absolutely. That people are willing to and want to engage in. The
Well,
odds of doing that are perhaps lower than
Well,
John
yeah,
expects.
but
Yeah.
Well, the best outcomes are the nonviolent demonstrations like Martin Luther King Jr. And Gandhi and so forth, but the risk is they turn violent and then it doesn't serve anybody. It breaks down.
That's right, and that is the challenge that we all, that everybody in this field has to face.
And
Very
Tom,
often, by the way, the
you
organizers
raised the
want it.
question of, what do you want the end result to be? Or what do you want the end effect to be? And it occurs to me that what you really want is that John understands that you are with him no matter what he decides. That you love him and that that's not gonna change no matter what the end result is. And I have to give credit to my father, you know, he always reminded me poignantly that you need to come to me and you need to tell me the truth, and I don't care whether you're wrong or you're right, I'm with you. And that was helpful to me.
Well, it's always dangerous to analogize ourselves to the Almighty. One can see in that approach, that stance, that come to me with your failings as well as your questions, as well as your hopes. That is a key part of our faith. And it is an approach to life that is what churches ought to be involved in. Brooks talks about a return to teaching moral formation. Helping that schools ought to help people learn how to restrain their selfishness and care more about others. Help people find a purpose. Teach basic social and emotional skills so we can be kind and considerate. I don't disagree with any of those objectives. I just suggest to you, schools have so much on their plate now. And the schools are not necessarily places where those are going to be taught well or necessarily be taught well. And that it perhaps is for the churches to be focused on this, not to say they're not now, but it is to say that the role of churches in acknowledging the worth of each individual child in our care and each individual person who comes to the door.
not only the
is-
church, but the family.
Absolutely, absolutely, the family and the church. One of the things we talked about briefly before was, where are the parents in all this? Why is he coming to grandma?
Yeah.
Why is he coming?
Did you get this idea from your father?
No, I mean, but those are questions that are part of the big picture. I just suggest that as well, that there are places for the insights that we've tried to develop here, beyond the difficult conversation, as we call it. There are all kinds of places where it's important for us to tell each other that we love them, that we care about them, that we'll listen to them and be concerned. I think of probably the single most wonderful experience I had here at Trinity. And that was in the Joe Mead group. The group of folks men who met with Joe weekly at the coffee house. And
Kajani.
at Kajani. And it was simply, it was simply extraordinary. We didn't talk about Joe's illness directly or most of the time. We didn't hide it. But we talked about everything from real estate to sports to the crazy traffic and how hard it was to drive that van in heavy traffic. Judy made it possible for him to do that. And it turned out to be a support to the men who came thinking they were there to help Joe, and who were helped by Joe and by the others who came. Nicholas was extremely valuable in starting this, and Rick was absolutely central to
And
it.
I was the one that make sure the reservation was in place. I would call every Wednesday.
I knew that. Who was doing that?
To make sure that it was confirmed.
Sure.
Oh, yes, and there was one week you guys didn't go and they wondered where it happened.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this is when it was, very tightly scheduled, so, no, it was, I'm in the background here, I'm not the right sex to be, a really part of this whole group, but it was so remarkable. The camaraderie, and that was what it's called, coffee camaraderie that existed. And it started out really small and it grew and people would come when they could come. They didn't have to make a reservation. There was a table that was reserved for the right number of people. So it was this community that formed that made all these men trust each other and share with each other. And then the rest of us who were acquainted with these guys had a lot more joy in our lives because there was so much joy that was part of that experience. So it was shared in all these kinds of ways, and it's sort of like your faith. You have your faith, but it just keeps going out.
It's amazing.
It is
And
amazing.
the idea, it's godly. There is an opportunity here to apply the principles, not like we're using a cookbook, but the idea of being illuminators, the idea of welcoming, the idea of supporting, that applies not just in difficult conversations, but all through our lives. Any person you know is like grandson John in our illustration. The most critical affirmation you can make is that you love them as the unique human beings that you are, that they are.
Could I ask you a question
Yes,
about
sir.
that? So let's say that you've had the long conversation with John and it's been very productive. And John still decides he's gonna go out and demonstrate. And he says, now Grandpa, you're gonna be there to bail me out. Would you give him unconditional terms that you would bail him out, or would you put conditions on it? And let me give you the condition.
I'd tell him no, John. Yeah, as David said, I'd tell him, John, this is your decision.
Right.
And if you're gonna make it, I will love you, but I will not bail you out. That would be my reaction. That is, as a teacher of the course. It's simply, I think David was right as to what the
But
appropriate stance should be in that
Are there
situation.
other alternatives you might consider for an answer?
Since we're over time, I think I'm not gonna. It's for 50 years for nothing. And it's fine to hold up a mirror to people and hold them accountable if they behave foolishly. But our role should be more coaches than enforcers. Helping them bring out their best selves rather than urge them to be more like us. And that's where I'll leave it. I would ask that we join in a closing prayer. I'm on other slide for it, but I don't know, we don't have to say it together. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity we've had to be together in relationship with each other, with great music, good food, and time to reflect together on how to better live our lives. Be with us, we pray, and help us transform the otherwise disturbing features of our current political season into occasions to be aware of your power and your overwhelming love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good job.
Thank you.
I just add one poster, just a small poster. This happened.
Yes, he does.
As you know, Tom and I have been together for many years, but we started out with children of our own in other relationships. That means that those children of our own have relationships with each of us. And one morning I was working away when I got a telephone call from a grandson, or someone I took to be a grandson. I had known him and loved him for years and years. And he said, and I had to remind Tom of this, he said, "Grandma, I'm in the police station in Manhattan." And he sounded terrible. And I said, "Stephen, you sound terrible." First time I used his name. "Stephen, you sound terrible." And he said, "I've been hit and my nose is broken and I'm bleeding, so I don't sound normal." And the story goes on from there. Well, obviously this is developing into a scam, but when you get the call, despite being a lawyer and having heard scams galore, it goes into your heart and "Stephen, you sound terrible," and "Grandma," and this goes on for a while. And meanwhile, I'm running with the phone in to find Tom, and Tom is immediately saying, "No, this is a scam, this is a scam." And I started asking more questions and they hung up. Now, by that time though, I was an emotional wreck. I don't care how many degrees you have, I was a wreck. And I'm saying, what if it was real and the connection was broken? And I immediately try to reach his father, who is a bond dealer. It's almost impossible to get hold of Jeremy during the day. I get hold of Jeremy finally, doing everything but good. Well, I get hold of Jeremy and Jeremy says, "Mom, stop it. The call should have come to me. And from this point on, you will have a word. We will agree on your word. And your word, and we're going to talk to our children and to all of us. If something like this ever comes to you, you ask them what the word is." Now, for me, because I did franchise law my whole life, I said, okay, my word will be franchise, because nobody in their right mind would say franchise unless that is your word. And the bottom line I have is, you should have a word, and you should tell your children and your grandchildren what your word is. It's so simple.
But if I had said to Stephen, what's the word?
That would have been the end of it.
I never would have gotten so far down the line as to be saying, how much do you need?
Great story.